Welcome back. I'm talking to Ian R. Crane about fracking. Now then, as you know, Ian, there's a supposed huge deficit. The country is allegedly in debt. Now, people say that it's due to a financial crisis. I say that it's due to a theft. But again, you think that they're using this as leverage to possibly get this technique brought in or accepted. So just you pointed this headline out.
Oh yeah, this is a classic. This is from the Mail on Sunday on March 24th, and this headline here:
How gas gold mine under this pasture could help Osborne end debt nightmare.
Well, and it's 2 pages of pure propaganda. And let me just read the first couple of paragraphs, because this really actually sets the scene. It says, as you approach ground zero of Britain's potential shale gas bonanza and alight next to a 10,000 foot deep hole dug 5 miles east of Blackpool, your nostrils are suddenly assailed by the overwhelming smell of methane. Now, that first paragraph tells you that this is complete BS. And the reason is that it's talking about the overwhelming smell of methane. Methane is an odorless gas.
Yeah.
And that's why in the mines, before the Davy safety lamp, they used to take the canaries down the mines because the miners couldn't smell the methane.
Yeah, and natural gas, of course, has an additive to it.
Exactly, to give it a smell.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this, and this is one of the problems that I talk about in my presentations, because I show the evidence in Colorado and in Australia where the frack has been so effective in terms of breaking up the geology that the gas migrates through more pervious geology and eventually migrates out through the topsoil. So people are literally living in an environment that's contaminated with non-indigenous gases.
Right.
And those non-indigenous gases are effectively toxins, and this is what causes the neurodamage. It continues. It says, at first, you think there must be some catastrophic failure of a gas pipe deep below, and you wonder if the fracking revolution really can be the answer to keeping the lights on and Britain's houses warm. But the smell, it turns out, has nothing to do with the drilling of a gas well 2 miles below Lancashire farmland. The villains are cows in the neighbouring field, making their own very distinctive contribution to greenhouse gases. Now, at least he doesn't go on and proclaim, like 4 years ago, that the British dairy and beef herd should be culled because the cow farts were contributing to global warming. I mean, but people will believe this.
Yeah.
People will fall for this, and like I said, look, the reality is that right now we've got a major propaganda PR campaign being mounted by the government and by the corporations.
Now let's just throw in something from sort of my research and just widen it a little bit in terms of energy as a whole, okay, Ian? Because my view is that all forms of fossil fuel extraction should be gotten rid of.
Correct.
Because of certain suppressed energy technologies, if they were developed, one of which I suspect is called fusion, which was suppressed in the late 1980s. And if that had been developed over the last 20 years, we might not even need fossil fuels at all.
I agree.
And so it's sort of, to me, that's the ultimate solution to this. Obviously, the world's not going to come off fossil fuels overnight, but would you agree that the ultimate solution has to be to move away from fossil fuels entirely?
Almost definitely. And Richard, right now the oil and gas industry produces the equivalent of 90 million barrels of hydrocarbons every single day. We have never needed to consume hydrocarbons in that quantity. What people don't realize is that Henry Ford was instructed to stop building the electric car in 1896, and that instruction came from a guy called John D. Rockefeller, who owned Standard Oil. And of course Rockefeller realized that if he was going to maximize the oil interests, then he needed to shut down the electric vehicle production and encourage internal combustion engines to be produced. And in fact, Rockefeller went on to buy up the electric tramways in American cities. eventually shutting down the tramways and introducing buses. And then as the internal combustion engine became cheaper and cheaper, then winding down the buses and encouraging people to buy their personal vehicles. But even today, I mean, just think about this. You look at all the other technology we use. Look at the advances in those technologies. And yet we're still reliant on our main means of transportation and our energy on a technology that's effectively 130, 140 years old. The average vehicle on the streets today returns 35 miles a gallon. This is very, very carefully calculated. Some return more, some return less, but it's 35 miles a gallon. No substantial change in the last 50, 60 years. The reason being, first of all, the oil industry produces 90 million barrels of hydrocarbons a day. It wants to sell 90 million barrels. The second factor is that governments are in collusion with them, because after income tax, taxes on hydrocarbons are the most effective way of raising taxation revenues. So in the UK, for example, we have the outrageous situation where we're paying £1.35, £1.40 for a litre of petrol or diesel. 86 pence of that is tax. So we are paying more in tax for every litre of fuel that is purchased than we were actually paying for a litre of fuel just 8 years ago.
Yeah. You think there's a global financial collapse at some point going to happen?
Yes.
They're going to pull the dollar completely in.
Yes.
There'll be no dollar. And will that be the start of a war, do you think? Or do you think, what's your crystal ball telling you?
Again, my perspective, I mean, let's just talk about the financial issues for a second. I mean, as I've been saying, and many others have been saying for the last 4 years, anybody who has anything in the bank other than an overdraft needs to be ready to say goodbye to it. And of course, you know, people have been saying, oh, that'll never happen. Well, that's exactly what the people of Cyprus said, you know, a few weeks ago. And then, you know, they went to bed on a Friday night, and by the time they woke up on Monday morning, they had effectively lost a significant chunk of their savings.
Yeah, and as I said earlier, I think they're priming people in the UK to possibly accept this. There was a loaded question on Question Time the other day, which was, does the panel think that what happened in Cyprus could happen in the UK? So there is this psychological programming to accept some possible collapse.
Well, and the people have accepted it.
Lose all their savings that's in bank accounts. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen this. I mean, Ireland, the people of Ireland have had their country stolen from them. You know, they've had their natural resources stolen from them, and there's no reaction. The people in Cyprus have had their savings stolen from them, and there's no real reaction. So, you know, the globalists are actually of the opinion that they can do this stuff, and yeah, there'll be a little bit of outcry in the media, but you know, basically the people will just bend over and
And you mentioned on your website the perceived debt of the UK. I call it perceived debt. Is a certain percentage of GDP. In other words, 86%. GDP is all of the money spent on products and services in any 1 year. Is that not right? So everything that everyone spends in an entire year, if you take 86% of that, that's how much supposedly the government and everyone else owes to somewhere else.
Yes.
So, but are you saying that? Can you put a figure on when things will really start to crumble? Like if that gets to more than 100%?
Well, 100%. I mean, once basically the level of debt exceeds 100% of GDP, it's game over. I mean, the bottom line is that the country is then owned by the banks. And this is what's happened with Ireland. And I'll use Ireland as an example because obviously many people watching this programme are in the Irish Republic. But Ireland's a very sad case because in 1800, the Irish government of the day signed the Act of the Union. And the reason they signed the Act of the Union was because Ireland was so indebted to the British bankers that the Irish government could see no other solution than to effectively dissolve the Irish government, dissolve the Irish nation, and hand it over to the British. The British landowners moved into Ireland, bought up the land at pennies on the punt, and 40 years later, there was a catastrophe. There was genocide caused by the British landowners, because the British landowners were farming Ireland, obviously, and all the arable crops and all the beef dairy products were being shipped out of Ireland to be sold at enormous profit elsewhere in the burgeoning British Empire. Meanwhile, the Irish people were left to starve on the blighted potato crop. But there was never a famine in Ireland. It was simply a case that the British landowners took it as an opportunity to effectively depopulate the country. And people either died or they were given a ticket to cross the Atlantic and go to America. Now, obviously the Irish people managed to get their nation back, at least in some shape, by 1922. And here we are, 91 years later, and basically this time it's the European bankers and the IMF that now take control of Ireland. And because they've got control of Ireland, they're taking control now of Ireland's natural resources. And the fracking issue that we've been talking about for England is going to be even more of a nightmare in Ireland, because right across the heart of Ireland is the Loch Allen Basin. And the Loch Allen Basin is prime target. It's low-hanging fruit. And I think, if unless the Irish people actually come together and start to realise what's occurring, then the country is going to be turned into an industrial wasteland within probably a couple of generations.
And of course, the problem with the people who are really pulling the strings is they don't have a website or an office that you can contact or write a letter to or complain about. Now, false flag terrorism. As you probably know, I've been doing a lot of work or covering the work of Dr. Judy Wood in quite a lot of detail now, and it's I've come to the realization, or my belief now is that there was some kind of double cover-up on 9/11. So we were first, the official story is that alleged airliners caused these towers to disappear, and everyone in the truth movement just says that's a load of bull. But the one man who was instrumental in bringing about the thermite theory was Professor Stephen E. Jones, and I'm fairly convinced now he was working for the other side, working for the New World Order, because they were leading people down this controlled demolition theory, because the towers were actually destroyed using hidden technology. So in other words, it was a double cover-up. I just want to ask, where do you stand on that, Ian? I'll just explain that Judy Wood's book has sold approaching 1,000 copies in the UK.
How many thousand?
Approaching 1,000, and I think it's several thousand in the US. And there's 115 customer reviews on Amazon, 99 of those 115 giving it a 5-star rating. So to me, it's the most comprehensive scientific analysis of the evidence of 9/11. So where do you stand on that, Ian, with the work of Dr. Wood?
Listen, I have stated for many years that whatever it was that brought the Twin Towers down is a technology that isn't in the public domain, and I've actually left it at that. I mean, the physical evidence, which is that the Twin Towers literally collapsed into dust. I mean, they were pulverized, and whatever it was that caused that is unknown, an unknown technology. Now, Judy Wood has put forward a hypothesis.
And she would dispute that.
I appreciate it, but for me, and I think our challenge is still to get the vast majority of people to actually question the events of 9/11, and to challenge the official version of events. And yet when people are struggling to actually come to terms with the fact that there's a possibility that it wasn't 19 Arabs wielding plastic box cutters, you've got to take them in small steps. And I think if you try to give somebody the PhD course before they've even passed the 11+, then they're not going to be able to comprehend where you're coming from.
All right, but the point I'm making is that, well, Stephen E. Jones was the person who covered up cold fusion, and there's no doubt in my mind that he is an operative of some kind. And then I look at people like Richard Gage. I would put him in that same boat. I mean, do you think there's a shadow cast over the likes of Gage?
I don't know. Maybe he does actually believe what he's presenting. I mean, I actually gave a presentation alongside Richard Gage in Cardiff, I think about 18 months ago. And prior to that presentation, I told him that in the course of my presentation, I was going to state that controlled demolition did not answer the question of what brought down the Twin Towers.
Okay.
And so, you know, really what I was trying to do was prepare him for the fact that I wasn't going to buy in to his hypothesis.
Right. Okay.
And I was going to actually encourage people to look at the physical evidence, you know, because, you know, the photographs and the video footage from the day, it clearly show that there is a marked difference between what brought World Trade Center 7 down at 5:20 in the afternoon and what brought the Twin Towers down, one less than an hour after the supposed plane went into it, and the other one about an hour and a quarter. And the other factor is that, you know, if you look at, again, the photographic evidence, there is no rubble. I mean, basically, these Twin Towers just literally disappeared in dust.
Yeah.
And I'm really at a point where I'm going to simply say, look, you know, we don't know. Judy Wood doesn't know. It's a good hypothesis. And it's probably the best that's out there right now. But where we really need to get to is a point where there are people who actually have the courage to really probe into what occurred here and get something out into the public domain.
Well, just briefly, just to answer that, Ian, the majority of the book doesn't hypothesize anything. What it does is it actually describes what happened. So it explains the evidence. In other words, it examines the seismic trace, which show that that amount of material wouldn't have created that amount of seismic activity. So it goes into what it establishes is that it wasn't conventional.
I agree.
Through a whole range of different pieces of evidence. Okay, so it's majority of the book is a study of evidence, and we can all agree it was a weapon.
Yes.
Okay. Something not conventional that was a weapon that presumably involved energy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no absolutely. I mean, where we absolutely agree is that something occurred that day, which is actually not explainable by technology, which is in the public domain. Yeah. I mean, you actually have to suspend your understanding of Newtonian science to believe the official version of events.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Okay, Ian. Now, what I'll do, what I'm definitely going to do, I'm going to write to my MP and educate him about fracking and tell him, you know, the issues that you've raised, the environmental issues, etc., etc. And I think viewers should do the same.
Absolutely.
But thanks for your time, Ian.
Thank you, Richard.
And it just remains for me to say, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.